I have two questions, and one's about ritual, and the other one's about relationship. And so I don't know that they actually go together, and I would be happy with an answer to either.
Well, let's see what we can make out of it. Yeah. Ritual and relationship.
So since I was a little girl, I felt pretty called to ritual in its many forms. And it's a pretty important part of my life through tea, and has intensified since we've met. And I feel like it's part of where I'm going, and yet it's also a language that I'm learning. And so I'm feeling my way and discovering new significance. And so I feel like there's something about ritual at this time that feels like it's wanting to speak through me. And I feel like sacrifice is part of it, and also beauty and creation, and this initiation as well, of my own new forms of consciousness, my own awareness, and then also anyone I touch through that ritual and ceremony, it's, I hope, of some benefit. So that's the first part. And any wisdom or insights that you might have there would be deeply appreciated. And then the second piece is about relationship and your own perspective, as well as a tantric perspective on relationship. And the context for me is, I feel this impulse in relationship to really surrender into it, into intimate relationship very fully, and yet I'm constantly disappointed in that. And it's a powerful source of heartbreak, being broken open in that way. And so maybe I'll just leave it there, but any thoughts would be.
Just, I want to ask you, just to make sure I fully understood the part about relationship which you have referred to as constantly being met with disappointment, right? What is exactly disappointment is about? What the disappointment, is it about the way the relationship unfolds? Is it, speak to that first so that I can see clearer.
I think what I'm finding, the pattern, if there is one, it does seem like there is a pattern, has to do with finding people who want to be correlated but not really in relationship. So it's, while it's kind of, there's not a real sort of deep dive into the ocean. It feels like there's this sort of struggle on the surface. So I keep attracting partners who, while it's convenient, while we're walking in the same direction, we're in relationship. But as soon as there's a friction or a struggle, it ends up breaking down over that. So, and I'm asking because that theme has resurfaced again recently, and it feels like it's some of the same language and some of the same themes, and I feel this real desire in me to go deeper, and I feel that there's a way in which relationship can be connected to one's awakening, and yet I'm aware that there's a pattern here. There's a propensity here that's at work, and I don't fully see it.
Yes, I can now see it clearer. So maybe we should start with relationship and see maybe how this in turn connects to the ritual, or we can tackle ritual on its own. Let's speak to the relationship. Well, let me say something first, that may not necessarily sit comfortably right away with everyone. And there's a deliberateness in that. So let us first unfold that relationship is an assault on our self-created boundaries. Every relationship, and the more intimate the relationship is, the more our boundaries, or the boundaries that within which we feel comfortable, protected, safe, are being at the mercy, right, of that what the messy fact or the messy factor of the relationship brings in. So in a way, the negative stance or negative way of putting it, not because it's negative, but we put it in a negative way to find the positive side to it. So a relationship is a violation of our boundaries. Well, you know that any time any country enters an alliance with another country, it's always at the expense of the violation of their sovereignty. Have you ever thought about it? The country, when one country enters an alliance with another country, it's at the expense of the loss of certain sovereignty. I just thought to bring first this example of the country. And then, of course, we don't want to go too much into politics, because here in politics, this would be to the amount of how one country begins to dominate another country, and whether this dominance is in evolutionary direction or not. Because that's what it happens in politics. Smaller country looks for a protection and looks for fruitful collaboration for all forms of benefits, but it happens always at the expense of losing its sovereignty. Then that country no longer free to make decisions of their own, because then it is subjected to that alliance. When it comes to these human affairs, individual affairs, it's not much different, but the picture is simply pertaining to our world of experiences. So it's intimately being felt on a daily basis. We don't think about politics on a daily basis. Doesn't matter, even if we live in a totalitarian country, a democratic country, we don't think about it all the time, because it's simply inconsistent with our experiences. But in a relationship, there is no way out of being in that where our sovereignty is always challenged. So, what's good then about relationships? Well, there are a lot of good things, right? To begin with, there is this nature's given drive that we have to share life with someone. It is to connect to another being, obviously, on all planes, to connect to another being, to meet this shared field from that physical plane to all the other planes that what goes to or goes into the making of the totality of the human being. So obviously the propensity there and the drive towards entering the relationship is always there, unless we are born with such a reclusive predisposition. Then the only relationship we seek is a relationship with God. And we know that also, that there are examples, usually the exceptions out of the rule, when it either happens very early on in life, and people try to adhere to the way of other people's lives, only to find out that that's not what they want. We don't want to just go and talk about that, because it's very rare when an individual does not want to be with another human being. The only desire there is to be in a relationship with God. So it will be settled at that level. The affair will be settled at that level. So what happens to those of us who essentially at the mercy of this, of what the full gamut of the desires drives us to be with someone? It's first to understand that what it cost. One need to understand the price right away, there and then. And the price here we pay is the most dear price there is. It's that our sovereignty will be, as it were, no longer as we thought about it. So a relationship of any kind is a conscious sacrifice. It's a conscious offering. And if we don't have that understanding, all relationships will be simply a bummer. No, I just don't want to come up with a more, it's that. All relationships doomed, because somehow we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to be in a relationship and preserve our sovereignty intact. It doesn't work. It simply never worked and never will work. So, relationship, then you asked, how does this viewed in the Path of Tantra? In the Path of Tantra, relationship is precisely the most important aspect, because it's only in a relationship that one can learn anything about one's Ahamkara. And if one doesn't know about one's Ahamkara, one cannot know one beyond one's Ahamkara. This is how it really now, it's an opportunity to speak to that. Providing most of us already have this understanding of what Ahamkara is, because we spoke about it a few times in the course of this week. Ahamkara is that principle of individuation, and it's that what gives our individuality its particular flavor. So, relationship is a fertile ground to learn about oneself, but not as a detached exercise, not as a kind of investigation into the domain of what that really is. It's a visceral opportunity and a possibility to truly be faced with one's limitations in a sense of what the Ahamkara represents. And these limitations, as long as this relationship is rooted in some of the fundamental foundational qualities, if it is rooted in respect. You see, It may be disappointing to someone that people want a relationship be rooted in love. But this is where misunderstanding comes in, because what love got to do with it, as Tina Turner sang, right? You can love someone and cannot be with them at all. And then, of course, the drama is born and one is ready to write pilot and Bible and go to Hollywood. Because the relationship, essentially, a love is the way it is spoken today and the way it is understood is not the love that is spoken in terms of that state of equilibrium when one simply recognizes that there is no other. Love is the recognition of oneness of life. And every single human being, only very few exceptions, don't know what that truly means. We just forget or pretend. The experience of love, it's the first direct taste of divinity and immortality. It's the first direct taste of the dissolution of these boundaries. Because when we love, boundaries fall away. Because it's impossible to love with the boundaries. When one truly loves, the amount here cannot be spoken about. True love knows no boundaries. It doesn't set conditions, it doesn't know conditions. Therefore it is spoken of as unconditional love. But what often we as earthlings call love for another human being is very often a very skillfully made projection. It's that projection that works, and soon as it doesn't work, suddenly all that love out of the window. How can that be? It's impossible. Love is not something that comes and goes. Something else comes and goes. In fact, something else is constantly subject to coming and going. So therefore, in a relationship, it is the respect that first and foremost being recognized as the healthiest ground. And if you look into these more ancient societies, then that where a lot of cultures found themselves in agreement. That often, if there is a respect, love will follow. Love will be accessed, and this is a truly tantric understanding. But if someone hopes that as long as one has love, then everything will be fantastic, then everything will be great. And then people very quickly find in states of predicament, because love is not here what true love is, but that what we prefer to recognize, a portion in ourselves, we recognize in the other and adore it, or adorn it, or glorify it, pedestalize it, worship it. And then, sooner or later, because it's not a full picture, it's the carefully carried projection of the part in me that I prefer in you, or in you, or in you. It's a part in myself that I somehow like more. And then I will tell you, I love you. I love you. Yes, because that part in myself I recognize already intimately. And I now willingly project outward onto another. But that's not true love. It's a projection. And there are a lot of infatuations, so it's more appropriate to call it infatuation. When we get infatuated with aspect of ourselves which somehow smiled back at us in another person for a time being. Therefore, always it has been spoken with that degree of adjustment. All love flows to the self. And equally true is that all love flows from the self. When love flows to the self, it naturally, organically finds anything on the way to that flow to be loving. Everything and everyone will be that expression, because the love is directed to the essence of who one is. So this essence of who one is also inseparable from that what we call self-love. Self-love, not selfish love. Self-love. Self-love is selfless love. Self-love is always selfless. And we know that and we learned that when we were crushed as teenagers, hopefully. Because this is when we experience it in the most innocent way. We don't yet know even how to be crafty about it. And that is so disarming. This is so devastating. It's the most devastating experience, probably, the first experience of love. And if we look into ourselves, and if we look carefully, we will find out if that love was always there, that love was indeed all there was. There was always love towards someone. We always loved someone, our whole entire life. Maybe the first love was towards the mother, because it was love that in the most primitive, primordial of ways, it's also rooted in dependency. We are totally dependent. We are at the mercy. It's a survival here. And yet it is love. It is love for the mother. And then that love begins to be experienced in myriad of other ways of how we love father, brother, sister, anyone, a pet, and a favorite enterprise, whatever we like to do. There's this swelling feeling of love that rises there. It fills us, and it also, at the same time, annihilates the sense of self. That's what true love is good at. It literally removes these boundaries of, they are actually really self-perceived boundaries on the account of somehow thinking that we need this protection. But more about it later when we go back to the Ahamkara. So when it comes to the relationship, it's a willing sacrifice. It's one prepares for that offering. This is why in more tribal societies, in more kind of, if you will, older cultures, these affairs, how they were set. I'm not talking about premarital agreements, although in India, funny enough, it's part and parcel of the culture. It belongs to the customs. It maybe frightens, so to speak, civilized being, but it is a legitimate way of how marriages are fixed. You know, like if parents have enough wisdom and knowledge, they will consult astrologers, they will find out provenance, they will make sure that they know where the girl and where the boy is coming from, what families, so that the marriage would work. Society there need to reassure that it will produce a healthy, happy, blissful offspring. It's not up to wild, kind of like chance of meeting, falling in love, and then separating 2 years after, or 2 months after, or whatever. So of course we can criticize and look with contempt to these arranged marriages, but there are different marriages that are also viewed with the same respect. There is a marriage of Shiva and Shakti. It's the marriage which is at the top of the hierarchy of all marriages in the Indian subcontinent, is where two meet, and on the account of mutual affection, no other parties need to be involved. No need for asking for the hand of the bride. It's fixed there and then, wherever that is. And it's a legitimate form of entering into the relationship. Relationship is consummated there on the account of willingness of both parties. There's no violation there. So, going back to this, you see, relationship. In our day and age, it's becoming, you've noticed that well-known people, celebrities, find it very difficult to form relationships. It's a known fact. We're not making it up. Celebrities, not just movie celebrities. Do you know that that factor belongs to the world of science? That weakness in marriages is not just found among Hollywood A-listers. It's anywhere where there is the status of celebrity. There is this greater possibility for not being able to form harmonious and strong partnership. Why that is? What do you think here is at play? It's the clash of Ahamkaras. Nothing else, nothing more. It's the clash of Ahamkaras, because in the first place, it's these two Ahamkaras jostle against each other. Jostle against each other. Yo. And the recognition here, of course, is that portion of me that I project outward and reflect it back to me is to my liking. And if it's the other way around as well, then we can go and call it a couple. But there is no understanding of what it takes. And there is no an iota of willingness to offer and sacrifice anything, because there's this kind of words don't even enter the language. Of course, it starts to enter the language later when the people enter counseling. When people go into this help of the professionals. And if professionals are good, if professionals are hopefully themselves if not spiritual adepts, but at least having spiritual practice of their own, because if they don't, what can they advise? What can they advise? What would be the basis of where they will advise? So, Ahamkara and relationship. The term well-developed ego, or the term as a strong Ahamkara, does not amount for that what makes someone into a celebrity. Many celebrities, and some of you have met them, I've met plenty in my life, are deeply insecure people. Deeply insecure people. The machinery of the publicity are blowing them into the status bigger than life. But in real life, it's the same human beings, obviously. So it's not that someone's Ahamkara, well developed, amounts here for what we're speaking of. The well-developed Ahamkara is precisely that ability to expand, knowing the contraction, but ability to expand, embrace, encompass. Well-developed Ahamkara is not rigid at the edges. It knows that it will be asked to sacrifice, and it's only willing because every sacrifice expands my Ahamkara. So in other words, weak Ahamkara, weak sense of self, will always be usurped, will always feel violated. The sovereignty will always be invaded, whereas any act of offering strengthens the Ahamkara because it stretches it further. It takes it outside of the confinement or outside of the self-imposed boundaries. This is why those of you, and especially women who were put in a position of being mothers, had their Ahamkara tested precisely on the account of what that pertains. Having children is the greatest assault on one's sense of self, and for the right reason. That selflessness of the mother is where Ahamkara is literally pushed beyond its limits. It's open, its diaphragm, because it knows nothing other than giving. It forsakes its own needs, because that's also a matter of fact of daily life. It is required. Maybe not in all cases, maybe some people have constant babysitters, then boarding schools, and they shovel the children away from them, like, no one blames them. Of course, like if one can afford to have that luxury of not having one's kids all the time, then one would take it. The most loving parents would do that, and they always do. But that's not what we're speaking about here. So the relationship is an act of conscious offering of oneself, knowing that one will be transformed, and that is Tantra. One goes into the relationship to be transformed, not to be the same. In fact, that's why relationships break down, because if someone wants to enter into the relationship to continue to be who he or she was, then they totally miss the point. Totally miss the point. It's an alchemy. This element and that element put together gives birth to the third element. We don't know what that third element is, and that's the beauty of it. That's the magic of it. And nothing will be smooth. It will be smooth with the rough, high with the lows. So, think or two about relationships so that we don't hold some kind of ideals that life fails to deliver somehow. There need to be first this recognition, this readiness, and then the magic begins to happen. Or simply relationship begin to work. Providing it is based and rooted in respect, in a growing sense of mutual reverence. appreciation and reverence that is not necessarily confined to the culturally accepted ways. This is where, of course, where a lot of interesting things begin to happen also. We get enriched in many, many ways in relationships in the areas where we're least expecting. Least expecting. And anytime we forgo our needs, we realize how we are actually growing in our sense of self, expanding. You see? So in a way, this leads us to this where you have started from, the ritual. There is just that gentle, maybe allusions we will draw and make these connections. Ritual has a purpose. If ritual has no purpose, right, then it becomes an act of decadence. Ritual has to carry something. It doesn't matter how casual it is. It has to carry something that alters something in the environment, even just a little bit. It just does something to the environment. It just changes the vibration. It opens the time. It makes time to stand still or maybe slows it down. It opens the dimension to the reality which otherwise is always concealed. This is what ritual is for. And it feeds through the act of offering what this ritual represents, the subtler dimension of this reality, which otherwise will go starving. So, and that act of balance between that deliberate elaborateness that almost takes over the actual act of what is taking place. Therefore, as you probably know very well, as a lover of tea, that Rukyu, who was the greatest tea master in Japan, declared the way of tea, or the art of drinking tea, is about making tea and drinking it. He called to strip down that overall elaborateness, that this baroque, this decadence that grew around it, that snobbery. So the black cap is in a museum now, from where he drank his favorite beverage, under the bulletproof glass as a national treasure, because of that understanding and the message that came with that the core and the essence of that ritual that he knew no. Well, he was a master, and that says it all. And he simplified it to that. The art of tea is about making it and drinking it. So this directness, the also economy of means, influenced culture to a great degree. This is what we admire Japan. What we admire Japanese culture is for that economy of means. It's like It's where the sense of beauty is and has always been about clearing the windows of perception. So that one begins to perceive beauty where it is hidden, because it's always there. And it seems or stands as an antithesis to the extravagance of Western culture throughout its history. Extravagance, excess, with all this, which one way or the other, we started with politics. How was it possible? Well, because the empires were big. That's all. Empires were big. It's not because it's suddenly the buildings and all these Baroque sculptures in Rome, Paris, or London grew out of earth after the rain like mushrooms. And all this guild and glory was paid from the goods taken from the countries that were colonized. So when we view it from that, we have a different attitude to the ritual as well. Now, this is why you have also noticed that there were, there's so many ways that how we can go into the rituals. And the reminder is that our path is the path of this internally performed ritual. Internally performed. Because if it's internally performed, then the external aspect of it is already, no matter how laconic, no matter how austere, is rich. And if it's not internally performed, doesn't matter how elaborate the whole thing is, the whole ceremony is, it's lacking in content. So one way or the other, you see, it's about making and drinking it. Let it serve you well.